Welcome to the Renegade Report. I'm Jonathan.
And Ramon is present. And the things we do for no money, Jonathan.
You know that the gravelly-voiced imp. I'm very glad to have you on the call.
Well, I mean, if Shelley Garland doesn't want white people to vote, if imps can vote, I'm really better than you.
Yeah, you might be. I thought that was a great, if very insulting description. And indeed, if you haven't read the column yet, Shelley Garland is back. Lots of salt being mined over at News 24. Peter du Toit very upset that Shelley Garland is back. Doesn't understand why Shelley Garland is back. Some people saying, why would you copy Titania McGrath? When she already exists, you don't need to do the same thing, except for the fact that Shelley Garland is the original.
That she is, and what I want to say, I mean, Shelley Garland brought down a media empire. She's a heroine of South Africa, and I'm very glad that she's crawled out of her hippie commune to come, share her pearls of wisdom with the rest of us. I think it's very important, even though she's highly insulting towards me, but I got a thick skin. I'm used to it.
Indeed. So if you want to read that stuff, I think that's on the dailyfriend.co.za. Look, I'm not in nuts about the name, but new sort of opinion website, and go read it. There's some other interesting stuff on there. Good stuff by the IRR.
Yeah, absolutely. So it looks like a repository for their columns, and so far I've been reading it most days, and it's superior to most other opinion news sites that I've read, so well worth your time. So that's enough punting the alt-right on the show, because this is not an alt-right show, despite what our enemies talk about. But speaking about being mislabeled, we had rolling blackouts for a week, often called loadshedding, but that's just a euphemism. And then somehow, when Moody's is in town, loadshedding is suspended, amazingly enough. And no one finds that a bit odd.
Well, I suppose it's odd, but it's like when the teacher at school would sort of be walking into the classroom and you'd be playing, I don't know, some sort of cricket game with your mates in the classroom, and then suddenly you hit the ball and the bat and pretended like you'd been doing your homework or something. That seems to be the case here. I'm quite confused as to, I suppose, what you're alluding to, which is how it's possible that we can be in the status of stage 4, threatening stage 5, stage 6, and who knows what's going on with the grid, and then suddenly everything's stable and we're back to normal and it's all fine and well. It's just completely odd.
It is odd because, funny enough, when the president said they're going to unbundle Escom, there was like load shedding within the week or two after that. And they blamed all sorts of things. The lack of coal, right? The quality of the coal wasn't good enough. So we thought, okay, that's weird. And then all of a sudden it went from stage 2 it was stage 4 then as well. And then it became stable again within a few days. So I thought, all right, it's definitely sabotage. It has to be. Nothing much came out of it. Oh yes. Cyril said there will be no retrenchments at Escom. And then all of a sudden the grid was stable after that statement.
And now Moody's is in town and it's stable again. It could also be a conspiracy by the solar people and the people who sell generators. It's a great way to kickstart your business. Excuse the pun.
Yeah, I actually had to go buy an inverter. Best money I've spent this year, that's for sure. It works very well. Get an inverter, especially from a Jewish firm in Sydenham, just to irritate half of UCT and a few politicians that we know. Support Jewish business. They need all the help they can get. But anyway, but now load shedding is gone for the moment. And I just want to know how much money is being spent on diesel until the election. I can imagine it's going to be tens of billions of rand, because essentially diesel is what's plugging in all the holes because the boilers and all that aren't working. Essentially, that's the argument that was made for load shedding. Now, it's going to be billions and billions and billions of rands till the election.
Thank you, Roman Trump. Yes, billions and billions. You're not meant to run a power grid on diesel. It's not designed for that purpose. It's really, really a bad thing to do. But we're basically just testing how long infrastructure lasts without being looked after. And I suppose the answer is 25 years, maybe 30 if you assume that the Nats didn't attend to much in the last 5 years they were in power. So I guess we're discovering that if you don't service something for about 30 years, that's its breaking point. And yeah, diesel, we're burning through it. There's been sort of rumors, I'm not sure how true this is, that we may actually run out of diesel, which is worrying for someone like me who drives a diesel car. But these are some things to worry about. Listen, meanwhile, while we weren't watching, never mind the diesel, the ANC spent 900 million rand paying off debts of people who had NSFAS loans. Because, well, hey, why not? And it is 2 months before an election, so may as well spend taxpayer money on that.
Yeah, I did see that. And forgiving debt is probably one of the worst incentives someone can have, especially for countries that take in sort of foreign aid or IMF bailouts and things like that, and that gets excused after a few years. Because actually it is far better to have a debt-stricken country change from the inside due to the burden of that debt, rather than forgive the debt on a country where the authoritarian leader can just then carry on and get more debt elsewhere. I don't see a very good reason why student loans should be forgiven, but many other things are not forgiven at all. But I mean, if this country doesn't make sense at the best of times, so it certainly won't make sense before an election.
Well, the bigger concern there is really that I don't know if they've made clear who is actually being given the sort of payback. So is it people who took loans and just haven't been able to get work because they've gone to university for stupid reasons, like to do arts degrees? Or is it people who've actually gone on to get jobs and refused to pay back the loans? Because during the time of Fees Must Fall, one of the demands was that regardless of whether people found work, and good work for that matter, we're talking about people from the legal profession, accounting profession, business side of things, these people, if they got work, shouldn't be forced to pay back their loans. That wasn't fair because universities should be free. So really not a good idea to do this, and just removes more personal accountability from our society, which is frankly the last thing that we need.
Cannot agree more, but yeah, election season is silly season, and we can, we've seen a lot of populism from a lot of different parties leading up to this election. I think, other than the 2016 one where the racial, war room of the ANC was in full force and, created Penny Sparrow out of thin air. Yeah. This one and others. This one is turning out to be quite vicious as well. I'm actually surprised it's not as vicious as I thought it would be, but just in terms of economics and just in terms of rule of law, it's a giant shit show.
Well, I mean, you're kind of caught in the middle of it. You obviously are a co-founder of a new party. We're not going to focus on the ZACP too much on the Renegade Report because, contrary to popular belief, two things can be separate and true at the same time. Ramon can be a host on the Renegade Report, the irreverent host he's always been, and he can also be part of a political party which is pushing capitalism in the country. But yeah, you've hit the ground running, and lots of accusations flying your way, and certainly the way of the ZACP.
So you got this project fear happening where certain political parties say that a vote for a small party will bring in an ANC-EFF coalition in the Western Cape, which is wrong, because the provincial vote determines the Western Cape, not the national vote. So you can certainly vote for the DA, in this case, provincially in the Western Cape, and they still retain a majority. But nationally, you can vote for whoever the hell you want, because it won't affect the vote in the Western Cape. in particular. And a lot of other accusations. The Renegade Report will never be a mouthpiece for the ZACP. My opinions on this show are the same as my opinions in real life. That has never been different, and that won't change at all. However, to assume that this podcast, which is 3 years older than the political party, is somehow going to be inextricably linked to the political party is false. I will still be objective. I will still ask hard questions of people who come into the studio and be our guests. And this will never be a mouthpiece for any political party whatsoever, because that is not the point of the podcast. That is not the intention when we started the podcast. And it certainly won't be the consequence of the podcast. So for all those who are trying to create a link between the Renegade Report and the ZACP, look elsewhere, because it's completely false.
Yeah, I remind everyone, I'm also 50% of the show, and I am not part of the ZACP. I have not decided who I'm supporting in this election. I think the ZACP presents interesting ideas. We've had COPE on. I think they presented interesting ideas, and they backed, AfriForum's position on expropriation without compensation when it mattered, unlike the DA. And I happen to agree with that position. So I think there are lots of other parties. You may be looking at someone like the ACDP. If you're a religious person, you might like that party. I think this whole trying to scare you off of small parties is a load of crap. The only thing that EFF has probably done any good at is proving that a small party actually can have impact at a national level. We have EWC, unfortunately, because of the EFF combining with the ANC to vote that in. We also have Pay Back the Money, and that happening to Jacob Zuma by the EFF, a 6% party at the time. We'll see what they become, but the point is that small parties can do things, and this show has never been dishonest about its bias. We've never claimed to be objective. We're not like the Mail and Guardian, who tells you that they're objective and then tweets out that Donald Trump colluded with the Russians when he did not, in fact, do that. We're not an unbiased news source. We have our opinions, we have our views, and those views have been made very clear. So yes, we will align with some of the things that the ZACP says, and we will align with some of the things that COPE says. We will align with some of the things that the DA says. And we'll criticize things of all of those parties, I would imagine. Please, if you feel that we're taking it easy on anyone, you'll let us know, because you have before. So I have no doubt we won't have an issue in that regard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And between Jonathan and I mean, one of our favorite guests was John Steenhuisen, the best chief whip, the best chief whip this country has seen in decades, or probably ever. And he's a hardcore, DA acolyte. And, despite that, we're very fond of him. So, I mean, none of that will change at all. And if we bring Canton back onto the show, another member of the ZACP, Jonathan will use, his ownership of the program to
a bit of stick.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, just put that to rest. So there's no link between this and the ZACP whatsoever. If there are sensitive things that I can't talk about on the podcast, I will let people know beforehand. Say, I can't talk about this, I'm sorry. And that's it. That's it. It's the same courtesy we give to all our guests before they come on. We say, are there things that you would rather not speak about? And sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. So that same courtesy will be extended to me, of course.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about this Trump thing, since I sort of threw it in there. So the media has spent almost 3 years basically accusing Donald Trump of colluding with the Russians. Up to 2 weeks ago, they were calling him a Russian asset. And that's not just, when I say they, it's not some random blue-tick journalist on Twitter. The former deputy head of the FBI, the former head of the CIA, these are all Obama appointees. These were the things they were saying. The news media carried this as a legitimate story for years. BuzzFeed had several sort of absolute sort of nail him to the wall stories that came out. This was going to be the end of Trump. Everything from the P tape, which apparently doesn't exist, to a story quite recently on Russian collusion. And it's all come to naught. It's all really come to naught. The Mueller, I'm sorry, I'm going to screw that up slightly, report, I'm going to call him the Mueller Report, has not been fully released. So if you're still hanging on to that shred of hope, good luck to you. But a summary has been sent to Congress, and the summary makes it quite clear that Donald Trump did not collude with the Russians, and neither did anyone in his campaign. And in fact, nobody has been indicted for that. And the only crimes that have been indictable were unrelated things. So Paul Manafort, stuff that he did long before he was involved with Donald Trump. He was always a bit of a dodgy character. Michael Cohen, who did dodgy stuff with taxi medallions in New York and tax evasion and a whole bunch of other stuff that went on there. And really, this was a story blown completely out of proportion by the media, because instead of doing the journalistic, following the journalistic process, they were so obsessed with destroying Donald Trump that they didn't care if the story they were telling had any real truth to it, and if the breadcrumbs were really there, or if they were just hallucinating. And now we are where we are.
Yeah, so it really torpedoed any chance of Trump being impeached in the slightest. He'll definitely finish his term and probably win again if he decides to run again, because his approval ratings keep climbing. I mean, they're still, I think, under 50 or just around 50, but within the Republican Party, they're high 80s as far as I'm aware, or low 90s, which is far more important than a general popularity rating across all voters in the US. And I think a lot of people did pin their hopes on this. And I mean, you know, if I was an American citizen, I would be relieved that, you know, the president was not put in by a foreign power. I think that's a great thing and something to celebrate, because we know that, you know, after years of investigation, that Donald Trump won an election fair and square, without any collusion with the Russians. And I think that's good. It shows that democracy is working. But somehow it appears to some of our opponents that this is actually a very terrible thing. And it seems like they would have preferred that Donald Trump was a sort of double agent or a plant of the Kremlin. And I think, but that is a far worse indictment on American democracy than the reverse, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, look, we can't walk away from the fact that the two things that have happened here. Number one is that the Russians do try and run disinformation campaigns within countries in elections. The truth be told is that most large foreign powers do this. You want to be cross with the Russians? They do it. Is it right? No. Was it right for Barack Obama to tell people just before Brexit that if you choose to Brexit, you will go to the back of the queue in negotiations with the United States? That wasn't right either. So, and that was, you know, Obama campaigning against Brexit. So these things happen. It is true that the Russians did try to interfere, but if you actually pay attention, the people in the know will tell you that what the Russians try to do when they interfere is they try to create division. So they're not aiming for a specific winner, probably because it's too difficult to manipulate a relatively democratic process into a specific winner. Certainly the United States would be very hard to do because of all the different districts, which then feed into the states, which then feeds into the electoral college, and so it becomes really difficult to manipulate that. But by creating division, which they seem to have managed to do inadvertently, they get people to fight against each other, and they get a divided country. And a divided country is not a stable country. And, you know, talk of civil war in America is happening. Whether that is you know, very far off or not at all possible, the reality is no one was talking about Civil War 2.0 10 years ago. And they are now. They're talking about it as if it could be a possible reality. And that's a win if you're the Soviet Union. So there's that. And then the other side is that the news networks have done this job almost for the Russians. Probably unwittingly. I don't think that they intended to. I did see a funny comment. I think it was Scott Adams who said it's very clear now that the Democrats and the media are Russian collaborators, and they've been doing this the whole time to cause upheaval in the United States system. But I don't think they were doing it wittingly in that respect in terms of collaborating with Russians. But they have created a lot of division by basically pointing at the president, the democratically elected president of the United States, a man who was voted for by 60 million people. Yes, I know he lost the popular vote, but still 60 million people voted for the man, and calling those people all kinds of names, calling them Nazis and calling them anti-Semites and homophobes and misogynists and, all of these things. And that's created a lot of unnecessary division in the country. And we've had it here in South Africa. We had the Guptas and them running their sort of disinformation campaign, and it works. It works if you've got enough behind you, and if you've got enough media coverage. The EFF is a good example in the South African context as well. One guy, an upstart essentially, who got kicked out of the ANC, who the media loved to cover, and now they don't know how to deal with the beast they created. And I think the United States is going to be similar in some respects. I think this gives Trump an incredible advantage going into 2020. He's been basically cleared of accusations. There will still be people screaming at the sky. New York and California are still going to vote overwhelmingly against him. But the people in the middle of the country will see this as an attack on the democratically elected leader and an attack on the system. And I think he's going to, as a result, find it a lot easier to get voted back into office.
Yeah, no, I do agree with everything you say. I wonder how much he will use as ammunition to go after Hillary Clinton's, underhanded tactics and issues with her server and her emails and things like that, because that was never actually investigated. It would be, if he's a troll, and we know that he is, he would say to Robert Mueller, all right, now you can investigate Hillary Clinton with the same amount of effort and the same budget and the same amount of teamwork, and go after her, because this whole thing about Russian collusion was initiated by the Democrats, namely Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, especially after Donald Trump won the 2016 election. So if you think about the opportunity costs of the Mueller investigation in terms of time, money, effort, and not just the cost of the investigation itself, the ripple effects on the economy generally speaking. I mean, if you think the president will be impeached in a year or two due to the Mueller probe, are you going to invest that much money in the US? Are you going to really go, balls to the wall in terms of infrastructure and things like that? So I don't think the damage by the Mueller probe or report can actually be measured in any meaningful way, but I think it's quite substantial. And it would be interesting if Trump doesn't use the amount of power and goodwill he has now to retaliate in that way against people who will never be president, or, because they have been before, or because they're just not popular enough, like Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, it's interesting because for all of Trump's faults, he hasn't retaliated against his enemies very much. You can look at Congress, Chuck Schumer, and Nancy Pelosi, Senate and Congress there. He hasn't really done much to retaliate against them when they've rebuked him quite strongly. He uses words. Trump's a media guy. Trump goes to the media and he says things, and then he'll tweet stuff out. But in terms of trying to actively go after his foes, and either using the power he has or abusing the power he has to do that, he hasn't done that a lot. And what's quite interesting is now that he's been cleared, he's said very little. He tweeted a tweet, something to the effect of, his first tweet after this all broke was, good morning, have a great day, which is a clear troll. He never says that. But what he's doing is he's going, I literally have nothing further to say because I'm so sitting pretty right now. And then he got off Marine One, arriving back at the White House, and went up to the media, and this is the first sort of in-person interview he had done since the news broke. And he walked up to the cameras and said, I just want to say that America's the greatest country on the face of the earth. And he walked away. So I'm not convinced he will go after Hillary. I think you're right, he probably could. He'd face the same criticism that he himself has given, that it's a witch hunt. He'd face the criticism about the cost, because about $25 million was spent, which is really nothing in the overall budget, but it's nevertheless, it seems like a large amount of money to people. I'd be very interested to see if he actually did it. I think there's more ground. Certainly, if you read into it, the Steele dossier was funded by Hillary. The Steele dossier then caused FISA warrants to be issued, which are basically warrants where you can tap American citizens and sort of listen in on their lives and conversations and all the rest of it, which is actually unconstitutional, but is allowed in certain instances when it's in the national interest, essentially. There's a lot of bad stuff that happened, and a lot of sort of fruit of the poisonous tree, and legally there's a lot of debate to be had about whether Clinton, Obama, people in Obama's administration did things that they shouldn't have done. But I'd be very surprised if Trump doesn't just do what he usually does, which is just blow it up in tweets, repeat it again and again in the media, in his rallies that he goes to, because that's how he wins. He's very much a talker. He has been a doer in some respects, but he's good at talking a big game, and people have responded to it.
Yeah,
so
very much so.
I think he's just going to carry on with that.
Yeah, and also just briefly mentioning, the tactic he's used against his opponents. I think the most obvious one was revoking Jim Acosta's press pass for the White House, which to me wasn't that big a deal. But if you compare that to what Obama did, he used the IRS to spy on conservative NGOs. He lied about various other things, what the Republicans wanted, and things like that. I mean,
he used his attorney general to do a whole bunch of illegal stuff. His attorney general had to.
That's true.
He was in contempt of Congress. So, they had to basically lie on the president's behalf. He had to use executive privilege to get himself out of that.
Very true. Forgot about that.
He's called the scandalous president, but actually he had many scandals. They just weren't very reported. And look, the truth be told is there's going to be a lot of criticism about the media in the United States and worldwide, for that matter. I mean, there's people in South Africa who should be apologizing as well. EWN, Mail and Guardian, ENCA has been carrying the Russian collusion story just off the back of the Americans. And so there has been all of this sort of media stuff, but the one perhaps positive is that this is how the media should be with power. That's the whole point of the Fourth Estate, is if the media was as anti-Obama as they are anti-Trump, and whoever comes after Trump, if they're as anti-them as they are anti-Trump, that's how it's meant to work. Not to the point that you make up stories, and not to the point where you get obsessed with conspiracy theories, but to the point where you challenge everything, and you double check everything, and you triple check everything, because you shouldn't trust the government, and you shouldn't trust people with power, and you need to hold them to account. So perhaps there can be some sort of middle road here where, because they just don't like Trump, they carry on checking on him, but they do it in a genuine, reasonable way. And we move on from this insanity. I mean, polling in America about media is all-time lows. The media is trusted less than double digits in the United States. And the biggest thing is you have really shot themselves in the foot. Next time Donald Trump says fake news, how are they going to refute that? To the average person, it's very difficult to refute the moniker of fake news when you spend 2.5 years literally reporting fake news as almost every single bulletin. And even if some of the news is true, and even if some of it is well done, they gave Pulitzer prizes for this stuff.
Yeah, and then you have someone like Rachel Maddow of MSNBC crying on air when the Mueller report was delivered and the contents were made public. She literally cries on air because it didn't go the way she thought it would. Now, we're not against, partisan hackery on the show, but just say that you are partisan. Like, don't have this sort of mirage of objectivity and then call out anyone who says otherwise as, attacking democracy because you're attacking the media and we are part of the democratic machine. It is that obvious. You have a host of a big major news show crying on air because a report did not go the way she thought it would. You can't turn around and say that we'd objected and truthful. You just really can't. So it'll be interesting to see what the media comes up with. I have a feeling they'll double down once again. I believe there'll be more polarization than ever. I believe there'll be some new conspiracies arising, telling us that Trump is not the real president due to X, Y, and Z. And who knows? I don't see a way out of this. In a unifying manner. I just don't at all. It'll be very interesting to see what happens when Trump leaves office and someone else takes over, and see what happens then. But while he's in office, the animosity is just on both sides is just really, really high.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and it will be interesting to see. Maybe perhaps I'm a bit more hopeful than I should be. And look, when you point to someone like Rachel Maddow, Brian Stelter, these people who are big names in their respective networks, and on the other side as well, you've got Sean Hannity as well. I mean, Sean Hannity's a ridiculous show if you've ever watched it. But perhaps those people are too invested at the moment and are just too partisan to ever even give the other side a real break. You might expect that this would first come from the late night shows, because the late night shows used to be quite good at balancing the insanity on both sides. Jon Stewart became quite more left as he went on, or more Democrat focused as he went on. But in the early days, he was really good at mocking both sides. And that's what you really need. You need both sides being ripped to shreds. I mean, the Democrats are a joke at the moment. They're a parody. You've got them. You've got Ocasio-Cortez, putting out a Green New Deal with proposals like replacing or renovating every building in the United States in the next 10 years, getting rid of cows because they fart, and replacing air travel with rail. That is a legitimate proposal that she put forward to the Congress. So these, and she's now a leading voice. This is someone who won about 15,000 votes to get her in a very blue district, to get her seat in Congress. She's a relatively leading voice. You've got other people, new Congress women, who are there making openly anti-Semitic remarks, then apologizing, and then 2 weeks later making more anti-Semitic remarks, and then either apologizing or refusing to apologize. The entire Democratic presidential grouping won't go speak at AIPAC, which is essentially an American group supportive of Israel, where typically it's bipartisan and Republicans and Democrats both speak on what they think is important and their views on the Middle East. And no one's prepared to go. It's quite nuts.
And let's not forget that 3 of the frontrunners for the Democratic nomination believe in reparations for slavery.
Yes, I do enjoy
which is absolutely insane, because I don't, for a number of reasons. Number one, I don't think there can be a monetary value to human suffering. I think monetary compensation does help, sort of, but to really try to judge that today, when slavery was 200 years ago, is a bit difficult. And secondly, who are they trying? What constituency are they trying to get? Who believes reparations are really what is needed? It's mind-boggling to me that this argument would make any political sense at all, but it seems to work. And this argument is given by someone like Kamala Harris, who jailed anyone with a gram of marijuana for years and years and years as a prosecutor for the state. And then she comes on to a breakfast show, a black breakfast show, and she says, yeah, she smoked weed and listened to Tupac in 1987. So, okay, cool. So you smoke weed, and then you jail people who smoke weed as well. Not a good look, Kamala. And 1987, Tupac wasn't actually around, so you got your rappers mixed up. But I'm sure they all look, very similar to someone like her. No, it's madness. It's absolute madness, and I don't see a coherent opposition to Trump at this point at all. If he decides to run again, he's going to win rather easily.
Yeah, I think unless they manage to consolidate on a lot of these things, so slavery reparations are just they're not going to sell. I don't even think they're going to sell to the people they think they're going to sell to. I mean, they're obviously trying to get to the African American vote, and I don't think a lot of African Americans view themselves as victims. So that might not sell as well as they think. But the entire American field is quite hilarious. So, one of the big things, criticism about Trump, is obviously he has no experience. He's obviously done stuff in his life. He's a businessman for better or worse. Property developer for better or worse. Hotel owner. Casino owner for better or worse, but he had never been in government really, and he ran for the presidency. And one of the main criticisms is, well, what do you know about government really? But Kamala Harris is actually one of the most experienced people, and she's not that experienced. And if you want to go back and see how she got to where she did, it's a bit of a sordid story. It's not unfair to say she slept her way to the top. Before she was appointed in California, she was sleeping with her boss, who ended up appointing her to that position. So it was a married man, I might add. So the morals are amazing there. But Kamala is the most experienced. You've got Beto O'Rourke, Robert O'Rourke.
Oh, geez. Is there any... That man is the most... He reminds me of Napoleon Dynamite to a T. And he has this habit of jumping on tables in restaurants and speaking from there.
Yes.
This man is an utter joke. And,
well, he every time he speaks, he makes a gaffe, right? So, and then even when he says something kind of half sensible, if people don't like it, he just immediately folds. The other day he said something like, my wife has spent the majority of the time raising our children. And people were like, well, that's sexist. And instead of going, no, that's kind of true. She's my wife and she's done most of the hard work with the kids and I'm proud of her for that. He kind of pulled it back and did I haven't been introspective enough about my role and all of this stuff. But this guy is a guy who lost to Ted Cruz. I don't understand how anyone can be a front runner, and he is polling relatively well at the moment for the nomination, having lost to Ted Cruz. The guy lost to a used car salesman. I mean, that is the real equivalent here. And it's not to take away anything from Ted Cruz. He's a smart guy, but he doesn't sell well because he's just got the wrong look, the wrong vibe about him.
He looks like a lizard, and his father killed Kennedy. So,
of course, yes, of course, and he's the Zodiac killer as well.
Oh,
so
yes, that's true.
There's that too. So that's Beto. Then you've got Kirsten Gillibrand, who basically is Wall Street's pick. And she doesn't know where she stands on any real issue. You've got Cory Booker, who's not polling anywhere. That's just a joke. And it's really interesting because Cory Booker entered the Senate as this bipartisan kind of guy. He was the guy who brought sort of a little bit of Democrat, a little bit of Republican. He was Democrat, but he was able to speak to the Republicans and kind of get them on side on the issues where the two sides agreed relatively well. And he was that guy, people really saw him as the bridging guy. He was able to say to the sort of more lefty Democrats, look, come to the party, and same with the more right-wing Republicans, and sort of produce success in that regard. That was how he was touted. He didn't do very well, by the way, when he was in charge in New Jersey. He messed that up pretty badly. But now he's gone completely off the rails, and also picking up on this identity politics, leftward stuff, and not polling anywhere. Interestingly, the guy who I think would probably win it at the moment, if nobody else enters, is Bernie Sanders. I don't see Bernie Sanders losing.
I also see that unless Joe Biden comes in, I think Biden will take it rather easily.
Yeah.
But Sanders is interesting because, well, actually he's not. I don't know why I just said that. He's not interesting at all. He's a wastrel. He slept on a couch till he was 40, and now has 3 homes and travels by jet everywhere. And he's from Vermont, which is probably the whitest state in the United States of America. And, he went to the Soviet Union and said it was wonderful. You see people queuing for food and really, caring deeply about their neighbors because they queue together. And this is the man, how old is he? Like 95? And by the time the election rolls up, he'll be 102. If this is the guy, is this your great hope for the Democratic Party? There's a lot of problems there. And let's not forget, what's her name? Bouchard. Something like that. All she's known for is abusing her staff. Like her staff had come out and said they worked
with stationery.
60 hours a day and all sorts. And her response was amazing. Her response was, I treat my staff the way I do because you'll need to learn these skills to deal with Putin one day when I become president. And so you think to yourself, what are you going to do? Smack him over the head with a bloody exam pad? Like, is that your foreign policy with Russia?
Amy Klobuchar. But, look, I mean, only senator on the Democrat side who stood up for Kavanaugh, so there's something to be said for her at least having some principles.
Unfortunately, the best candidate, sorry to interrupt, the best one, Tulsi Gabbard, nowhere. Because she's actually anti-democrat because she's pro-peace. She's a war dove, so she doesn't want any foreign intervention anyway. She met with what's his name, the president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad once, and she sort of made a gaffe where she said he's a friend of the US, which was a bit of a gaffe, I must be honest. But in the context, it made sense because essentially the US was funding Al-Qaeda affiliated rebel groups.
The point she was making is that sometimes you have to pick between the lesser of two evils. The same thing as people don't get about, for example, the American relationship with Saudi and Iran, right? Both bad countries, both oppress their people, both have shitty laws against women, for example, both have archaic laws against freedom, liberty, freedom of speech, expression, all of these things. But America chooses to be friends with Saudi, yes, for some oil, but they could choose to be friends with Iran for oil as well. It's just they've picked a lesser of two evils as far as they see it. And Gabbard was making a similar point about, she made it very badly, but she was making a similar point about Assad and basically saying you had a Syria which was stable. You had a Syria which was stable, which wasn't war-torn, which was relatively okay. It's still abusive. There was still gross human rights abuses, but was that situation better than it currently is now, and the situation there is now with 3-4 million refugees in Europe and Turkey, etc., or should we have left it alone? And
that's fair comment. Basically. And that's fair comment. So I agree with her in that part.
I think
she's for marijuana. Yeah, she's for marijuana legalization. She doesn't care about identity politics too much. She's a former army veteran. She's a congresswoman from Hawaii, and she was on Joe Rogan a few months ago, 2-3 months ago maybe, or even a bit more than that. And I listened to her, and as a Democrat, I'm not necessarily a Democrat person, but she was very, very reasonable on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think you're going to get reasonable.
No.
You look at someone like, we haven't spoken about it, but Elizabeth Warren. I mean, I don't think she's got a chance in hell because she lied about that whole Native American thing, and and that's going to sink her in a presidential race. She just can't. She's not going to be able to shake that. But the point is this is a woman who taught law at Harvard. She's not a stupid person. She may have ideas I don't agree with. She may be wrong on certain policies. She may be misguided. I think she is, but she's not a stupid person. And because the Democrats have swung so far to the left, she's saying stupid things to try and sort of keep up with that ideological shift. And I just don't think you're going to get normal out of this. The best case scenario, if you're a Democrat or if you're not a Democrat and they end up taking the White House, you have to hope for someone who's normal but sort of speaks the bullshit, and then once they get into power, hopefully tends more towards sort of center left than far left, which is where they're all leaning.
Well, there's the one outsider we haven't spoken about, Andrew Yang. I don't know if you heard about him.
Yeah, tech guy.
Yeah, tech guy, NGO guy, and basically he wants universal basic income due to the fourth industrial revolution in America. They'll take away jobs from truck drivers and, tellers and cashiers and fast food workers and things like that. Exceptionally bright. He was on Joe Rogan as well, and on my other favorite podcast called The Fifth Column. And he makes very good points about universal basic income and jobs in the future and how we can use tech and AI to help us solve the issues that might arise out of it. So out of any presidential candidate, in terms of pure idea, like policy-driven ideas, he's probably the best by far. I don't think I agree with UBI or universal basic income yet, because I don't know if job losses will happen at the rate they say they will.
Yeah.
But in terms of just pure policy, looking at solutions, things like that, he is really, really perceptive and really, really smart. And I do recommend, following his work, because I think that sort of policy-driven, solution-based politics will determine politics in the near future. I think it's far too early to make any impact whatsoever, but it could be the catalyst as an independent person to change politics to that solution-based, pragmatic approach rather than ideological approach. Because he said he's not ideological. He just hates guns and he loves the UBI, which I disagree with on both, but he has good arguments for both, which is rare and quite refreshing.
Yeah, and it's better to at least be having these content-driven discussions about, be it guns, be it UBI, be it any of these things, rather than these sort of discussions about whether men are men and women are women, or who places highest in the victim hierarchy this week, and who we really need to be worrying about because of that. They're not content-driven things, and they really are quite pointless to be had. I just want to talk about, while we're getting onto content, we had something interesting happen on social media past week. So we challenged a couple of people on social media. Some of them are upset about some of the things we've said. Move on. But one of the things I did find quite interesting, and I always do find interesting on social media, is when people sort of lower the mask. They drop the mask for a bit and they show their thinking. And I often find it so interesting because we've said on the show before that anti-racists really are often racists. And they're just kind of using anti-racism as this cover, because as an anti-racist, you actually can be racist, because the whole point is to identify different race groups and then claim some sort of hegemony around that, and then push a certain point of view. And some of our listeners might follow an account called Soulnomics. Ramon actually knows the gentleman who runs that account. And obviously one of the accusations against his account for a long time, because the account is right-wing, there's no other way to put it, I suppose. He believes in, very much Thomas Sowell's stuff, personal responsibility, free markets, and support of the individual over everything. And so this guy has pushed a lot of these ideas. and people have tried to discredit him. And the main way they've tried to discredit him is by saying that he's not actually black. So the thing is that I don't know why that matters, right? So as it happens, he's not a white guy, but which is what has been said about him. He's just a white guy with a front, and so he can't be trusted. But I don't understand why, if he's got a good idea about a certain point, or about a certain policy, or about a certain way the world views things, and he's got a certain counterpoint or a certain point of view, what difference does it make what race he is? And I find it quite interesting, because this past week we saw, a couple of accounts saying things like, well, if he isn't really a black dude, if it's a white dude, then that changes things considerably. And I don't understand how it changes anything, because an idea is an idea, and your melanin has nothing to do with your ideas. Ramon, any sort of comment on that?
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button on my side. Well, yes, of course. Well, I know who it is personally, and he is definitely not white at all. And attempts to dox him by members of parliament and others is really, illuminating to me as well. But Twitter is a platform for ideas. That is the essence of Twitter. A lot of people use it as a platform for brands and themselves, which is fine. They can do that, of course. But Saul Nomex has an important position whereby he uses his anonymity to spread ideas he thinks are important. And he should be able to bloody well do that without having to, be known personally to the people who follow him. So I follow an account called Comfortably Smug. Now, Comfortably Smug, no one knows who he is. It's actually people have been trying for a long time to find out who he is, but
you can find out if you Google hard enough. I know who he is, but it's not.
Oh shit! Really?
Yeah.
And he's one of the greatest right-wing trolls on the internet, by far.
Unbelievable.
He tweets things that are just amazing in their creativity. He's amazing. He thanks Trump for everything, including cheaper hamburgers at McDonald's or whatever. He's like, oh, thank God Trump did this for us.
Yeah, if there's a plane landing gear doesn't come down, and then it comes down and the plane lands safely, he's like, thank you, President Trump.
And I think he coined the term "own the libs." I think it's him, because I saw him say it first. It could be others though, and that meme came out of I think it was him. Now, I don't care in the slightest what he looks like, what race he is. I just love the fact that I got this account to follow that is extremely interesting, extremely funny, and always a joy to read. Always. We need to get out of this notion that ideas are attached to identity. It's fundamentally illogical, and it's extremely, extremely lazy, because all that people want to do is, as soon as they find out what someone is in terms of identity, they'll put you in a little box in their head, and they will use that frame to decide about everything you say going forward and everything you say going back. The amount of times I've been told, of course, as a white man, you would say that. It's a remarkable sleight of hand to discredit people without actually making a coherent argument against them. It's pure ad hominem all the time. And that this is considered a fair argument in 2019 is largely indicative of the general incompetence of debate and other things in a democracy. A democracy is meant to be tough. It's meant to be difficult. Free speech is meant to give people with dangerous ideas the ability to speak about those ideas and others to shoot them down. Identity is not important. If Cyril Ramaphosa or Jacob Zuma was a transgendered lesbian in a wheelchair, they're still bastards for what they're doing to the country. I don't care. If you steal something or if you committed a crime, your identity does not bloody well matter in a court of law. So it should not matter at all on Twitter.
Yeah, I just as I said on the account, the reality is if you need to know someone's skin color before you can judge whether they have good ideas or not, then you're a racist, because by definition you are going to assume their ideas are better or worse based on their skin color, and that is the definition. So I would really. It's interesting to me when people let the mask slip, I guess, and show themselves for who they are and the way they view the world, and maybe they aren't outwardly racist and they aren't treating people badly necessarily as a result of their racism, but it certainly does show how they think and how they view the world, and so the first thing they look at before they decide whether what you've said has value, or what you've written has value, or whatever way it's expressed, they first look, okay, white, black, whatever it happened to be, male, female, able, disabled, and all the other sort of categories you fit into, and that is de facto bigotry. So we're not going to do that. I'm sure others will carry on doing what they do because they're race baiters and they believe in this stuff. But it is quite interesting, and that account, that Solnomics account, has done a great service. He does tweet a whole bunch of stuff, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't, but he's done a great service in outing a lot of people who show that they value identity first. And people lost their minds recently at an AfriForum documentary that had some controversial stuff in it about Hendrik Verwoerd, who valued identity first before he valued the idea, in my opinion. And these people are no different. So I don't know what they're freaking out about, because they're peas in a pod with Hendrik Verwoerd, frankly.
Well, okay, maybe that's going a bit further than I accept the basic premise, but that's not my view by any means. I just want to finish off this podcast with New Zealand. So there was a terrible a terrorist attack by this Australian terrorist who killed 49 or 50 Muslims in a mosque.
50 people.
50 people in a mosque.
And several others injured.
So I saw the video. I saw I didn't read his manifesto. People did send it to me, but I couldn't be bothered to read it. But now, what is interesting, other than that being horrific, of course, is that the reaction in New Zealand has been completely Orwellian. So as far as I'm aware, the manifesto and the act of terror was to provoke things in a way to destabilize Western society, because, according to the manifesto, the whites need to have a civil war with the rest of the immigrants, and then the whites will win. That essentially was the plan. The New Zealand Prime Minister wore a hijab in Parliament, and she's worn it a few other times as well. Paying for the funeral services, that I think is fine. But they played an Islamic prayer in all schools in New Zealand. I think it's all schools. I could be wrong, but they did play it in public places, and people were expected to stand up and, stand in silence while the prayer was...
The call to prayer, yeah.
The call to prayer was being played. They banned semi-auto rifles within 10 days.
All semi-automatic guns. I don't know if anyone understands what that means. It means all guns. It means all guns.
That doesn't mean all guns.
Except for a rifle, except for a bolt-action rifle and a shotgun. It's pretty much all guns. A Glock, for example, is now banned in New Zealand. That's a standard handgun, and any equivalent handgun is banned. It's not just an AR-15 or those types of weapons. It's any semi-automatic weapon, and most weapons manufactured today are semi-automatic.
Yeah. But that response I found was, you're letting the terrorist win. You're letting the terrorist define your way of life. And I think this is exactly what he wanted. And I don't understand why people don't see this for themselves. Do you have any thoughts on this? Because actually rather horrified with the repercussions of
I've
this terror
listened.
attack.
I've tried to discuss it with people, colleagues at work, and because people have been talking about it. And I try not to get too political at work for obvious reasons. But so some people seem to have the view that this was the right thing to do, and it's quite compassionate in terms of the call to prayer. And there were a lot of people wearing hijab. So on the one night, I think it was, every news anchor, every female news anchor wore a hijab on television, and obviously Prime Minister and cabinet ministers and things like that. Anyone in the public eye. And look, there was some backlash to it from ex-Muslims, from people who fled places like Iran, Saudi, Pakistan, who said this is a tool of oppression against women. Why are you wearing this as a thing of solidarity? Like, we get that you want to be in solidarity with the community and you want to show them sort of care and compassion, but why would you pick this particular item, which in many places around the world is a symbol of oppression? So I think that was an incorrect choice, even if it was done in sort of a meaningful way, and people thought they were doing the right thing. I don't think it was a smart, a wise decision. With regards to all the Orwellian stuff, look, there's a couple of things that have happened there. So New Zealand has something called a chief censor. So they have something similar to what we have here with the Film and Publications Board. And they've extended their Film and Publications Board just like our government wants to. They've extended their powers to almost everything. Anything that can be put out there, be it on the internet, a book, a document, YouTube, whatever it happens to be. And this chief censor, which it does sound like it comes straight out of Orwell, straight out of 1984, he decides whether something should be allowed or shouldn't be allowed. So, for example, you've got the Killer's Manifesto, this terrorist manifesto, that's been banned. And if you have a copy of it, you can face 10 to 14 years in prison. And it's not just a threat. They, in fact, arrested a 15-year-old boy. I'm not sure what subsequently happened there, but they arrested a 15-year-old boy on this charge of distributing the manifesto. I think he put it on a internet Dropbox type thing, or sent it to a couple of friends, or whatever it was. So that's the one thing, that they're censoring information, which seems insane to me. That's all that's going to do is drive that into the dark web, and there's lots of shitty stuff on the dark web, and people will find that stuff and much worse stuff. The other thing that's happened is private businesses making decisions. I mean, I criticized this at the time. One of the largest bookshops in New Zealand has taken Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. I mean, this is a self-help psychology book. They've taken it off the shelves because they claim that it's full of hatred, and it's part of the reason why this attack happened, which is of course untrue. It's completely everything that Jordan Peterson stands against. He's against white supremacy. He's made that very clear on several occasions. He's really very much against violence. In fact, he would be completely against a person like this, because a person like this wouldn't have, inverted commas, cleaned their room. They wouldn't have taken personal responsibility for their life, instead of trying to blame others, instead of trying to harm others. And anyway, they've removed this book from the shelf. They've removed his book from the shelf. They still sell Mein Kampf. And I think it's quite ridiculous. And it's indicative of the entire response, which you've referred to, which is just over the top, frankly. And I'm not sure if why it is. If it's just because New Zealand, and it's generally not a violent country. It is quite a peaceful place, and they've reacted in a certain way. And perhaps if this happened in Paris, where they've had bad terrorist attacks before, they wouldn't have reacted in such a similar way. But I do find it particularly interesting and worrying, the reaction, both because these are not the reactions when the shoe's on the other foot. and the terrorism comes from the other side. There's a lot of excuse making when it's Islamic terrorism, for example. It's because the US bombed whatever country, imperialism caused this, or it's because people are nasty to immigrants, or, that's not indicative of the whole religion, which is somewhat true. There's a lot of excuses to be made, and nobody's wearing, when people get murdered in a church, which happened in France, I think about a year ago, a guy with a panga, I think, went into a church in France. People aren't wearing crosses on the evening news in solidarity, even if they're not Christian. Nobody's going to mass, even if they're not Christian. So that response is strange. In terms of the banning of books, in terms of the banning of guns, look, New Zealand is quite a left-leaning country. They've voted a essentially socialist government into power, very sort of pro-socialism type government into power, and so it's not surprising to see them take the reins and use this as an opportunity to push their own agenda. And look, to the people who say, well, why can't America get this right after every one of their mass shootings? I would say New Zealand's a warning. It's not a model to follow. I worry about a country that changes its laws in 10 days and makes almost every major gun manufacturer on the planet illegal. I would be concerned about that, and I wonder if they won't live to regret it. I am going on a bit, Ramon, but I actually chatted to a friend of mine in Australia, and he was telling me about a lot of the gun crime that they have in Australia and how it never makes the news. And that they do actually have a fair amount of gun crime, but it's kept on the quiet, so to speak. And one of the comments he made was that often it's between warring sort of gangs. They've got a lot of Chinese mafia.
That's true.
And so what will happen is one Chinese sort of gang will shoot another Chinese gang, and as long as it's bad guys killing bad guys, it's no big deal. But the idea that if you ban guns, they go away, or bad people won't do bad things, isn't true. Just the last point about the New Zealand shooter is he was Australian. He wasn't from New Zealand, although he gets free access into New Zealand by being Australian. But his guns were already illegal. As far as I understand, New Zealand law used to restrict the number of rounds you could have in a magazine, I think, to 17. And he had modified his weapons that he used in the attack to carry far more. And so it was really illegal.
Let's not forget that there was an attack on a second mosque that was foiled by one of the attendants at the mosque having a gun of his own and chasing away it wasn't the same guy. I think it was his cohorts was chased away by one of the worshippers at the mosque who had a gun on him. So that second attack was foiled by a gun-owning citizen of New Zealand as well. But anyway, I mean, the point being that this reaction makes the terrorist win, because this is exactly what he wanted, and he wrote a manifesto for that. And, people say the terrorist is a white supremacist and a far-right nut. I don't know. His manifesto says he's an eco-fascist. The greatest country in the world is China. It's all garbled. It's all very difficult to decipher whether it's satire, internet trolling, or reality. But it could be, between you and I, the first internet-inspired terrorist attack, if that makes sense. So he was big on 4chan, big on 8chan. And if you look at what he said there, and what people's response to his things, it's really vile stuff. And it looks like he was sort of egged on by people on those platforms to do what he did. So, it goes back to that thing about, human progress. The technology progresses, but the way we use it is always for good and for bad. It's never just about for good only, as many people think it is. But those are my thoughts on that. And Jonathan, any last words from you before we wrap it up?
No, I think that's enough on the show. Some stuff to rile some of our listeners up. I just wanted to remind everyone that we have moved on to a different RSS feed. That's the technical term for the way you download the show. That's just because we've moved on to our own platform. Some people still haven't got the message. Our numbers seem to show that most of you have. But if you think there's anyone who might not have realized, maybe they don't follow us too much on social media, or they haven't listened for a little while, maybe perhaps people outside of the country, please do let them know so that they can carry on listening to the show and carry on supporting or shouting at us. Either way, we're good with that.
Yeah, and important to note that our donations have dried up quite a bit. Since we still have Patreon on, but that's going to be deleted quite soon. So if you want to support the show, renegadereport.co.za/support-us, and then you can input your details for a monthly donation or a once-off donation through SnapScan, or a monthly donation through Payfast. We still have big plans for this platform. We still want to do talks. We still want to host public events. And things like that. So please don't forget us in the humdrum of the election and load shedding and all that. Money's tight. Use your money for yourself first before you give any of it to us. But if you do have spare change and you like what we're doing, please consider donating to us.
Yeah, and I think we can echo those sentiments. We are trying to set up, as we've explained, our own platform that involves a lot of stuff, but it all costs money. And Ramon and I have been doing the show for over 3 years now, free of charge. We don't take anything for it, and everything we've received either through Patreon or other generous donations, we've put back into the show, and are putting back. Our website was built on the money that a lot of you have donated, and all the other projects we're working on come through that. But the reality is that it costs a bit. If you can afford to give us, $50 in a month, we'll be more than grateful, because really there's enough of you listening that it all adds together and enables us to hopefully carry on delivering and carry on bringing you even greater content. And we've got some awesome ideas. We just do need a little bit of capital to invest in them. So I think we can call it for the week.
Absolutely.
Ramon, you need to get back to, I don't know, whatever it is you're going to be doing.
Yeah, well, it's 11:30 at night, and I have to be up at 4:30, so sleep will be the most obvious thing. Hopefully, by the time the next podcast comes out, our new studio will be ready. We do apologize for the lapse in quality of the last 2 or 3 podcasts, but we've been hamstrung by construction work and a variety of other things outside of our control. Hopefully by the time the next one rolls out, it's going to be filmed on YouTube. It's going to be crystal clear, and it's going to be the same quality that you always expect from us at Renegade Report. So thank you for sticking by us. It seems like our ratings and downloads haven't been too impacted by the sort of a bit laxer way of doing the podcast, and a bit of a drop in quality, but we are on it. Hopefully, as I said, by the next one, the studio will be ready, and once the studio is ready, we are going full blast ahead. It's an election year. It's a country in crisis, and I think voices like ours are very important. If I don't want to sound too self-important at this stage, but I do think we are doing something that not many others are doing, and we're doing it rather well. So just forgive us for the past few weeks, but we will be back on track by the time the next one rolls up.
Awesome. So that's all from the gravelly voiced imp. And as always, you can find us on Facebook or Twitter, Facebook, the page and the group. You can also find us on Twitter at Renegade_Report, Ramon at Roman Kabanak, myself at Jonathan_Witt. If you enjoy the show, please go to our new website, renegadereport.co.za. You can also donate on the website using a number of various platforms. Any information you want from us, any interest in investing in the show, any interest in advertising, info at renegadereport.co.za. As always, thank you for listening. If you listen on iTunes or on the Android store, please do rate the show. Please do tell your like-minded friends to download. And we appreciate it as always. We'll catch you next time. Cheers.